Deep breath. Deep breath together.
Yes. Well, thanks for having me, Dana.
Yeah, cool. Oh, awesome. Thanks for coming on. I
Yeah.
I'll just give you I try to do this show once a week, and I bring people on that I find to be inspirational, motivational, and encouraging to others.
Awesome.
And I think it's very fitting to have you on during this time. My wife and I are big fans of your music, and
Oh,
and,
thank
and
you.
we've enjoyed listening to it, and we've been jamming to it today. So we gave a bunch of hits to YouTube.
Well, thanks. I love that.
Yeah, no,
Awesome.
it's awesome. So I always like to kick off and ask a question just to get us
Okay.
started about how you got started. How did you get started in music, and how did you know it was your calling and it was something
Yeah.
that you could actually run with and turn into something?
Well,
It's a loaded
loaded,
question.
loaded question. The funny thing is when my mom was pregnant with me, she prayed the entire pregnancy that child that she was carrying would sing for the Lord all the days of their lives. And I think she was just led by God to like pray that prayer. Because obviously she didn't know like who I was going to be or what I was going to do and had no concept of like what that really could look like or spell out. But it marked me from the time that I was very, very little. I mean, my mom and I were talking about this the other day. I was three years old, I think, when I had like my first actual like solo performance in front of people. And so I don't have a memory where I wasn't singing, that singing wasn't a part of my life. I mean, she says you sang before you talk. Like it just was always there. And I think
Mm,
oftentimes when you have an external gifting, like an external talent that is like people can see it, they can hear it, um, that becomes a big part of who you are very early on in life, especially
yeah,
something that's like singing, where I think for most people it's just a natural gift. Like whether you
yeah,
have that naturally or not is just kind of there. Now, whether or not that thing develops over time and becomes something that you can turn into like a professional path, that looks different for
yeah,
everyone. And I always thought I would be a singer. I always thought I would be a recording artist. Like I grew up in an era where like I just wanted to be like the next Mariah Carey or the next like, that's what I wanted to do. That's all I ever thought of. Even though I was born in a like my dad was a pastor when I was young. And so I was born into a believing family. And you would think, oh, well, she would have just wanted to do Christian music, but I'm older than a lot of people probably assume that I am,
yeah.
and I didn't grow up in an era where that was really modeled. Like I'm a baby of the '80s, and so by the time I was in middle school,
Yeah.
you know, Christian artists didn't. It was just very different. Worship artists for sure. That wasn't even a thing. So I had no idea that like my path would kind of lead to where it has, but yeah, it's had a lot of twists and
Yeah.
turns
You know,
to how I've gotten here.
it's interesting that you say that because my wife and I were talking about this a couple weeks ago, how we find that like so many talented artists have found their way to Christian music, or they start, or, that's just where a lot of the talent is right now.
Mm,
It's
yeah,
a lot of very talented folks in that space.
I mean, I think for me, I definitely was going down more of the traditional, like to go do pop music.
Yeah.
I thought like when I graduated high school, I thought I would go to Belmont here in Nashville. Actually, I live in Nashville, Tennessee. It's my hometown. So
Okay.
I thought I would go to Belmont. I thought I would major in commercial music. And then I just honestly assumed like after that, very naively, oh, someone's just going to hear me sing and I'm just going to get signed to
Yeah.
Columbia Records or like, I don't know what I was thinking. And I mean, I did all the typical things because right when I was like, I had to have been right in my early 20s when American Idol like first on the scene too. So like I did all the things. Like I auditioned for American Idol and like I was making a demo and like kind of sending it out. And the funny thing was like I was very, like I said, naturally gifted. So
Mm,
I just assumed that would open every door. But anybody who knows anything about talent doesn't mean that it just automatically opens the door for you. There's so many amazing people, no matter what they do, what field or profession they're in. They're incredibly talented. And you look at them and you're like, how are they not like more well-known, or how are they not getting a break into that industry? I don't think talent is always the thing that actually sets you apart or opens the doors for you. And that was true for me. Talent did not open the doors for me. And by the time I was in my early 20s, doors were just not opening. Like it just was not happening for me. Those practical doors of, getting in front of a label, or getting in front of an A&R, or getting in front of a, publishing company, or whatever that was, that just did not seem to be happening. And because at 19, I had really sold my life out to Jesus and was like, okay, Jesus, like, I want to serve you all the days of my life. And I want to actually follow where you lead me, no matter where that goes. Not understanding at 19 how powerful of a prayer that is. But I meant it. And then God held me accountable to it. And so by the time I'm 25, nothing's really happened. Like I'm working odd end jobs. I sometimes do session work here and there. I'm working around the music industry, but I'm not getting any like traction. Just it's not happening. And I finally like had that moment where I was like, I feel like I should check in with God about this. Like, is this actually what I'm supposed to be doing?
Is this how it's supposed to go?
Yeah. And I think, just because a door isn't opening doesn't necessarily mean it's not God's path for you. But there was something deeper, I think, inside of me that was going, I feel like I need to check in. Like, I feel like I need to ask the Lord, like, am I really supposed to be pursuing this profession as a recording artist? And when I was finally bold enough to pray that prayer, God definitely answered, not in the way that I was hoping that he would answer. And I just really felt so strongly in my spirit that the Lord was like, no, like, I'm not asking you to pursue this. Actually, I'm asking you not to do it. I'm actually asking you to listen to what I'm actually saying and be willing to follow my voice, even though it's going to take you down a path that you didn't expect. And I really felt like the Lord in that season, it was my 25th birthday, actually, just said, are you willing to bury this dream in the backyard of your heart and not dig this thing up, like not keep trying to make this thing grow and make this thing like happen? And that was such a hard moment, right? Like, I'm 25, I'm a college dropout, I'm newly married. I have no like actual success to my name, and I have no backup plan. So there is no like, I've been like kind of over here, like watering a different profession, or I have no skill set, no, nothing. And I remember just being like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with my life? And it was a legitimate, what am I going to do with my life? And I began to have really hard conversations with my husband and just being like, what does this look like? Does this mean I go back to school? Does this mean I go actually finish school and like get a degree? Do I become a teacher? Do I go into journal? I was so at that point for the first time in my life willing to go, okay, God, like I've had a plan that's starting to feel like that's not your plan. So what is your plan? And what am I supposed to do? Hold on. Sorry. 1 second. My husband's being so loud in the background.
I can't hear it. It's fine. It's all okay, good. Listen, I told you right from the beginning, we keep it real on this show. He just
stuck in and he's like trying to be really quiet and like sneak food out of the fridge, but he's not being very successful.
He's like, honey, I've heard this so many times. I just wanted to hear it one more time.
Yeah, he's like, oh, please let me just hear this story for the 100th time. But that's kind of where I was at 25. And that took me kind of down a whole other path that's led to kind of where we are now.
So would you say that it's better that it happened to you at 25? Because I mean, I talk to a lot of young people today too, and they're 19, they're 20, they're 25, and they think their life is over.
Oh,
and meanwhile, it's right,
just getting started, right?
Yeah.
I mean, my story does not follow the path that we think, we tell ourselves is the like natural like progression, right? Like for whatever reason, we graduate high school and we graduate college, and we just have this like idea that it's all just going to happen then.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And then when it doesn't, we get disappointed, we get frustrated, we start to, I'm turning 40 next month.
What?
Yes.
40?
40. I know. I'm excited, actually.
It's happening, folks.
It's happening,
40,
guys. It's real.
40,
40's
it's
here.
real.
I'm on the down. I'm on the down, the down line.
No, you're
or
on the up.
decline.
You're on the up.
No, but it's so interesting because I think even our culture would say, who signs a record deal? Who signs their first record deal at 39 years old?
So, what's interesting
when record at 39, right? Like,
yeah, I just saw that you can't, I didn't realize that this was your first album that just came out. So I double checked to make sure.
Yeah.
So I'm guilty of that. But but that's actually what I think is so cool. Cause in my mind, I said to myself, what has she been doing for the past 20 years? And I was dying to find out because I know that you've been doing a lot of doing.
Yes.
I just want to find out what it was.
Well, I think that's what's, I get really excited to talk about my story because, that 25-year-old newlywed that thinks this is what it's going to happen, right? Like I'm 25. In my mind, I'm like, I'm getting close to 30. Like if this doesn't happen, then it can't happen, right? Mm. And yet something in me, because I'm a follower of Christ, which means I have to be willing to surrender my dreams, be willing to surrender my plans, be willing to surrender my ideas in order to follow Christ. What we tend to not realize sometimes in that is that in that willingness to be obedient and surrender, God actually writes the story that he always intended over your life. But a lot of times we want to be the authors of our story. Like we want God to like tell us the chapter titles of what my life's going to be. And then I want to go write it in the sequence that I think it should happen, right? Like I think this should happen, that I sign a record and put out a record deal at 25, like chapter 2.
Yeah, of course.
Right? And meanwhile, God's like, well, I think it's going to be a lot better if that part of your story is until chapter 30 or chapter 40 or whatever that is.
Yeah.
And what I had to do is I spent 15 years building the kingdom, laying down my life and loving Jesus, and still being a good steward of the gift on my life. Like I still was serving at my church. I was singing. I was leading worship. I eventually in my 30s, I started writing songs again, like way later in life. Like most people, if you're a songwriter, you've been writing your whole life. But at the point that you're 40, like very few people start writing songs in their 30s. And that's what I did. I started writing songs in my 30s. And in my mid 30s, not even like 30. I didn't start until like 33, 30, kind of in that range. But I think God is such an opposite kingdom, right? Like I'm such a proponent of like being a good steward of what you have and having good disciplines and like showing up and doing the hard work. But I think oftentimes we can buy into the lie that the hard work is, I have to be doing this in a capacity that is seen and validated and successful. And then that eventually will lead to then even just more validation and being more seen and more success. And my story has been the complete opposite. My story has been God constantly saying, are you willing to be hidden? Are you willing to go and do this with no notoriety, with no one seeing you, no one building, it not building your name up, it building my name up and building my kingdom. And finding value there and knowing that that's what I've called you to do, whether it's ever successful in the eyes of the world or not. And that took a long journey of being able to wrestle that in my own heart and in my own soul. But it also forged in me a deep sense of like, I'm called to do this regardless, because this is what God has actually said. I put you on earth for a purpose, to use songs and to use music to tell the story of who I am. And I think once that was really settled in my heart, it kind of became, well, then however you write the story is however you write the story. And I had to really let go of, it has to look like this in order for you to have kept your word and not disappointed me. Right? Like, because that's the trouble with writing our own chapters, and the trouble with deciding what it should look like means then when it starts to look different, we can easily start to feel disappointed, blame God, be bitter, feel anxious, feel rejected, feel not chosen, like all of those things. And meanwhile, God's kind of going, well, here's the thing. Like I think all of us, our call as believers is to go and make disciples, to love God with all your heart, to love others and go and be disciples, to go and tell about Jesus. You know, he says, go and be my witnesses to all of Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the outer parts of the earth. Well, the beautiful thing about that scripture is it says, go be a witness. Well, when I think of the word witness, I think of people that are in court, right? Like they show up to tell what they have seen with their own eyes or they have actually experienced themselves. And I think for me, God knew I need 15 years of you learning how to be with me and build intimacy with me so that when I do actually maybe give a place for you to be for what you do is highlighted in a season, that the thing that you'll be a witness about is who I am and the goodness of who I am as your father, as God, and not being just a witness of how talented you are.
Yeah.
Because one's going to maybe hopefully lead someone to Jesus and change their life. Another one just leads people to me and makes my ego feel good.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
And
think some people really enjoy that other one.
we
Making
all
the
do.
ego feel good, right?
We all do. My
Yeah.
25-year-old self so wanted that. Like, and I love, you know, I was actually just talking to one of my best friends this morning and I was saying, isn't it funny how like as believers, when we get into relationship with Jesus, we come into covenant, right? And like a marriage. And when I married my husband, I was making a choice to say, I choose you above all others, right? So anything else that would want to come and get in the way of that or steal from that, it has to actually be cut off. Like it has to go on the chopping block. Well, I think the same is true with God. Like we step into covenant with God where he is meant to be our first love. He's meant to be our husband. He's meant to be our one thing, right? The only person that we are worshiping. And anything that wants to like come in and compete with that, he has to actually like go, no, like you can't love this more than me because you chose to be in covenant with me. And I think oftentimes, especially for me in my story, my dream of being an artist became the thing that in many seasons I loved more than I loved God. And it became an idol. It became something that it was at competition within my own heart. And I think because God is faithful to say, well, we're in a marriage and I'm actually going to honor our vows. And so I'm actually not going to give you that thing in this season because it's going to cause you to love me less. And I'm so grateful for that protection because can you imagine if I got that at 25? Well, my ego would have gotten in the way. My like fear of man would have grown, anxiety would have grown, depression would have grown because all of my validity and identity would have been rooted in, well, when people hear me sing and I get to make records, that makes me someone special. And then you have to satisfy that. You have to feed that beast over and over and over.
Yeah.
And instead, God was like, we're going to go on this really long journey of humility, of learning to surrender your dreams in order to love me first, being willing to be hidden, be willing to do this simply because I called you to do it. And the fact that I think obedience is maybe one of the most successful lives you can live. It's just actually being a really faithful, obedient follower of Christ. I think that there is more success wrapped up in that than we give credit for. And I think, God's very honest in his word. He says, to whom is faithful with a little, I can trust with more. I can actually give them more. I can expand their territory. I can expand their capacity because they've proven that when they had a little, they really, really took care of it and they really cared and they were obedient to show up when there was no like sparkle and glitter and fanfare and, everyone going, that's amazing. Because what you see now being able to make a record or, what people would consider success of having, songs on the radio or songs on Spotify on Friday morning, whatever that is, that can look like success to everyone watching. But most often that's actually just the fruit of years and years and years of sowing seed in the ground and showing up day after day. And it doesn't always mean, just the like actual tangible of like being a good singer or a songwriter and doing the skill set. It's also like the ground of your heart and like, have you actually spent years and years and years really digging into the soil of your heart and allowing God to make sure that what's being planted there and what's growing there is actually
Yeah.
good fruit.
Which is,
That
that's an interesting point, because I think so many people, I mean, I know that a lot of people that I meet, they're always chasing, and they're always trying to
oh,
grab the next thing, and they're chasing there.
yeah.
And I don't think they're not confident in what they're doing. They're just always chasing and more and more and more, and they never have enough. So
You don't. You never get enough. And I think that's the truth. And so I think when, you're going to see a lot of people that are successful and wonder like, why are they so successful? Like what made them successful? Some of those people are just successful because they just have amazing hustle and amazing skill set. But that also means they have to sustain that.
yeah,
Versus when maybe you tap in and you go, okay, God, what's your way? Like that's specifically designed for me, the blueprint for my life, the blueprint of how we're going to do this. And you actually let God be the leader of that and show you the way to do that. Then he sustains it. And I think that's where it can become, that the burden, it doesn't have to get heavy. Like you can actually trade it in. And I think for each individual, the blueprint looks different. Like for me, it looks different from somebody else. But at the end of the day, like the goal is, God, what are you asking of me? So if you're asking me to step away from this for 15 years, am I willing to do that? And then
yeah,
when I turn 39 and you're asking me to step back into it when I actually no longer even kind of want to do it, and it doesn't really even make sense to me, am I also willing to be obedient in that season? Or a year from now, if God's like, okay, Hope, we're done. Like am I also like, am I willing to step away? And I think when you've spent a life building your relationship with Jesus to the point that your identity is in him, then there's always a part of you that you can walk away from things, you can step into them, you can walk away again. Because it's not the thing that's defining you anymore.
yeah,
And I think
you're not identifying with those things, you
yes,
know.
your talent, your skill set, your dreams are now not the thing that gives you validity. It's
Mm,
actually God himself that gives you validity. And therefore, when God says, this season's done, you're able to move into the next season without seeing it as rejection or punishment, but actually looking at it through the lens of like, well, this is just the journey that I'm on with God. That part of my season is done. Just like there's spring and winter and summer and fall, our life's like that too. And there was a couple of years ago where I felt like the Lord said to me, we had just come out of winter and we were like in the spring months. We were in like March or April. And I was just like praying and just, talking to the Lord. And clear as day, it felt like God just said, why are you wearing winter and spring?
mm,
And I was like, what do you mean? And he was like, I've moved you into another season, but you still want to wear what we were doing last season. And it's getting uncomfortable. You're getting hot because you're not meant to wear a heavy parka and a hat and gloves and a scarf in this season. And that's why it's getting hard.
yeah,
And you need to actually take off winter and put on spring. But that meant I had to let go of a couple of things. I had to change my schedule. I had to like step away from some things that I actually was really loving and felt like I was getting maybe some value in, right? But because I have a long history of knowing that when God asked me to shift seasons, it's for my good, I was able to do that. But 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I would have seen that as punishment. I would have seen that as, what did I get wrong that I don't get to keep doing this thing that I love? Or what did I do wrong that you're now maybe asked, like this door just shut or this opportunity just shut down? It's not always a reflection of,
mm.
you got something wrong, or it's actually God just going, no, we just have a different assignment in this season. And I just need you to be willing to follow me into that.
Yeah, and be open to what comes your way, right? Again, it's I always say we get really good at over navigating our ship, and it's like, I
True.
want to go this way, I want to go this way, and I'm going to
That's
do whatever it
very
takes.
true.
Yeah, and it's like you hear about everybody today is, stressed, anxious, burnt out,
Yeah.
fatigued, and it's like, well, you're probably just been pushing against the wind for so long, or against
Yes.
the tides.
Yes.
You have to just, go with the tides.
It's very rare that I see in my own life, God's kind of navigation for me is rarely look like what I thought it would look like.
Mm,
It's rarely ever been, I think this is what you're going to do. And then it ends up being something different, but it's always been better. Now, better hasn't always felt better. Better hasn't always, it doesn't mean that there's been the absence of anything hard. Oftentimes it's come in seasons that have like really been hard. They've been full of my own failures, my own disappointments, setbacks that were my fault. Like
Yeah.
it hasn't always just felt good, but
Is
I've,
it supposed to?
I don't think so.
I don't think so
Because think
either.
about it. Because when everything feels good, you don't do a lot of like soul searching
No,
and
you're
like
rolling.
you're like everything's great. But when
Yeah.
things like start to get not great, well, we start to ask questions. We start to be circumspective. We start to go, okay, well, wait, what we lean in, right? And I don't think that bad things happen so we do that. I just think in our humanity, the way that we are kind of designed, it's like moments of like, I think I need to check in. I think I need to, figure out where we're at, and so those moments have been the moments that have led for me to greater healing or greater freedom, or they've been a course correction. You know what I mean? Like if I'm going down this path and it's like, oh, I think we should go down this path.
Yeah.
And I think it's just that long road, like Eugene Peterson says, it's the long road of obedience. It's the long road of just showing up and every day being really sensitive to what God's asking of you and just saying yes every single day, even in the little tiny things that no one else is seeing, that no one else, and it may not even have anything to do with what your skill set is.
Yeah.
But just being faithful in all the little things, showing up on time, being kind to people, saying you're sorry when you get it wrong, just following God's word. Like honestly, like those things, a long road of obedience, it really does lead you to a life that you're meant to have in Christ.
It's those little things. I do a lot of writing about that. How many people get away from those little things? Just the thank you, even the thank you cards, right? When somebody gives you something, you say thank you.
Yeah.
But we've gotten it so far away from those basics in exchange for what I feel. So many people are just worried about themselves. Me. What's in it for me?
Yes.
And if
Well,
there's nothing in it for me, then I'm out.
There's a scripture that says it's the little foxes that destroy the vineyard. So it's not like some big massive thing that destroys your vineyard overnight. It's the little tiny things. It's the little microscopic things that get into the vineyard of your heart and into the vineyard of your thinking and into the vineyard of your behavior that slowly begin to destroy things that you don't recognize. And then suddenly you wake up one morning and you're like, oh my gosh,
What happened?
What happened? And I think for me, one of the things that I so recognize about my younger self, had the record deal happened when I was 20 or 25 and I'd been making all those records, I kind of alluded to this. I think I very much would have become someone that everything was about me.
Yeah.
Like you said, like it would have all been, how do I sustain it? How does it sustain me? How do I make sure I look good? How does it make me look good? Like it would have easily become a really, really, really anti-kingdom process for me. And I think when that happens, we're meant to bear fruit. Our lives are meant to bear fruit, good fruit or bad fruit. And I think I would have bared fruit that only fed me.
Yeah.
But the point of fruit is that other people can eat of it. That like, if I'm a tree, I'm meant to bear fruit so that others can eat of that fruit. And I look back and I go, I wouldn't have been able to do that. But in this season of life where I've really spent a lot of time and a lot of years of learning to walk with the Lord, just simply because I actually want to be a follower of Christ and not have anything to do with being a successful this or a successful that or a platform or a ministry, I'm able to come into this very open-handed and going, I just want to make sure that the fruit of my life is something that others can eat of, that tethers them to Jesus, that tethers them to the fruit of the vine, right? Like I don't want to tether people to me. When people hear my record, when they hear my songs, I don't want people to become, obsessed with me. I want them to become obsessed with Jesus. I hope that every song is a gateway and a door that leads someone to a place of going, I forgot that about Jesus. Or thank you for reminding me once again that God is a promise keeper. Thank you for reminding me once again that the hope of Jesus, it actually is not going to fail me. There's this in my hard copy CD, which probably half the people here don't even know what that is. But
yeah, what's
back
a
in
CD?
the day, back in the day when we walked through miles of snow to get to school.
We
No,
had these things called compact disc players.
compact disc, and we still we still printed some, and I like put in my liner notes. I was like, I hope when people hear my record, they love it, obviously. But the very last line was like, but I hope that these songs make you love Jesus more.
Hmm.
And I don't think I could have written that in my liner notes 15 years ago.
Yeah. You know, so as you're telling these stories, I appreciate it because I feel like it's so real, and I think a lot of people, could relate. When you were 25 till you're the first album at 39, turning 40,
Yeah.
did you have another career that you were pursuing?
Well, okay. So at 25, when I kind of like made that shift and was like, oh, I'm not supposed to pursue this in this season, or I'm not going to pursue this in this season. I really didn't know what I was going to do. And I went and just got like this part-time job at a bridal store. And I was just like, okay, Lord, what are we going to do with our lives here?
Yeah.
And, I'd always been someone that served in the church. I grew up in the church. I always served in the church. I grew up under, teaching that was just like, take your talents and go sow them into the house of God. So whatever you're good at, just go be a layperson and offer that to your local body. And so I would always just be like, well, however I can help, in a worship department or in the college worship department or whatever. Just, I was always like, whatever role I can, be. And sometimes that meant I literally was setting up chairs, and sometimes that meant I was like running lyrics or help, administration. And then other times it meant I was singing in a choir, or I was actually leading worship. I had so many various roles.
Right.
But that year of being 25, my husband and I really spent a lot of time just praying and asking God to be like, show us the next steps 25 is too young to not know what you want to do. Like, I knew there was too much life ahead of me for me to just flounder for the next, 20 years, 50 years or 30 years, whatever. So over that next year, as we began to really pray, I was simultaneously serving at my church and just showing up week after week, like putting on a choir robe, singing in the choir, offering to help in whatever way I could. And little by little, my heart really began to fall in love with the church and really began to fall in love with worship, the worship department. And I found myself dreaming about it. I found myself a passion growing in my heart, a love for the people that served in that. And simultaneously, kind of worship was changing. Culturally, you had movements like Hillsong were really growing, and you had Chris Tomlin was really growing. And suddenly there was this different side to music and Christian music that I just had never seen. And within a year's time, no one knowing it, but my husband and I, and what we were praying, and we started to feel like maybe God was actually calling me into vocational ministry, specifically like within music ministry for the church. And I had 3 different churches reach out, not knowing anything, just randomly, and say, hey, have you ever considered coming on staff at a church, being a part of a worship department? We would love to offer you a position. And none of those seemed right, but it was confirmation to us that God was doing something. And eventually at the end of that year, my home church here in Nashville ended up saying, you know what, we want to bring you on staff. And so I went on staff. And from 2005 to 2013, I was on staff at my local church as one of the worship leaders and the administrators for the department. And so I did everything from pastoring people to running rehearsals to, scheduling planning center online to leading worship. And that grew. And over that kind of decade, I had a lot of opportunities to travel and lead worship for conferences and women's events and travel internationally and, kind of guest appear and be featured on different worship albums here and there. But it was not something I was doing because I was trying to build a career. Like, it just was like every now and then a door would open. Right. And I'd be like, oh, that's kind of fun. Like I was raising a family. I was having children and I was making disciples. Like, that was it. There was no like greater plan. There was no like secret agenda of like, ooh, maybe this will grow into like,
I love that because I it's so interesting that the way you just said that, because I feel that some of our greatest moments come from when we're not trying and we're not planning.
Yeah.
And I come from the world of sports where it's about goals and it's about achievement and it's about what's next, right?
Oh,
and how does
I was
this
an
connect to
athlete.
that? Yeah.
I was an athlete for years, so I get it. Like,
so you get it.
there's measurables, then you're constantly like working towards those measurable goals that this is now we've gotten this far. So now I know we need to get this far. And very early on, God just kind of took all of that ability to have measurables out of the picture for me, because I was not even now able to pursue that thing that I thought I was supposed to pursue. So I was really having to live by faith and really be like, okay, God, you're going to have to map out my future, because I had a future planned. We've come to an agreement that that's not what we're now going after. So it really was an honest to goodness, the Lord just leading me year by year, yes by yes, like, and it was a constant just unfolding and just being willing to say, okay, God, wherever you lead me, I'll show up. I'll do the best that I can in that season. And then in 2013, I had some just really personal crisis. My parents were going through a really hard divorce that came with a lot of family trauma and difficult stuff. I had postpartum for my second daughter, very severe postpartum depression. I'd now been on staff for a really long time. And, I think one of the things that you can fall into a trap is being really good at doing ministry and not paying attention to when you actually need ministry. And I was starting to miss that. Like I can look back now and recognize the signs that I was missing those moments where I needed to get ministry. Because I was still working through identity issues, just because I had surrendered and just because I had gone down this path with Jesus, it doesn't mean that all my identity and validity just all got fixed overnight. That was still a really long process. And so that was kind of still showing its ugly head and kind of rearing from, here time to time. And because I wasn't really taking care of my own heart in that season, I was traveling. So I'm on staff at a church. I have 2 young daughters, postpartum. My parents are going through a really difficult divorce. I'm traveling every weekend leading worship at a conference or at my home church. There's just strain and I'm not dealing with it well. And so at the top of 2013, I kind of just broke down and was not in a good place, like emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And I just began to just really cry out to God. And it was a real crisis of faith, like a real dark moment of the soul. I was questioning everything. I was questioning life. I was questioning Christianity. I was questioning the church. I was just like, because I felt like nothing was working, right? Like it just felt like I'm doing, which was the problem, but I was doing, and it wasn't producing the results that I thought it was supposed to.
And how did that work? Because it sounds like you were already in this place somewhat at 25 and now you're there again.
Yeah. And I think, isn't that the journey? Like it's a constant journey of God going, there are new places to go in me. There are new places of freedom. There's new places of surrender. There's new places of that journey never, ever, ever ends. I'm telling you, I'm almost 40. It is a constant, the story of surrendering, being set free, building intimacy with Jesus, and then going, oh my gosh, we have to start all over again. I have to surrender again. And I have to that journey never ends. And so it wasn't so much, this was more of how do I explain it? I was 33 when this was happening. When I was 25, I didn't have a lot of life under my belt and I didn't have hardly any heartache. So at 33, I've experienced some actual loss. I've experienced some actual heartache. So there's places of disappointment that have gotten into my heart and places of distrust because of that disappointment that have gotten into my heart. And God in his kindness was trying to get all that to the surface and going, you're not paying attention to that. And it wasn't that I didn't believe in God. I was just questioning the works, which was the problem. I had fallen into a trap of really building a relationship with Jesus that was, well, if I do this, then you'll do this. I had kind of created subconsciously a warped economy system with Jesus. Yeah. And it was very much well, if my input is going to result this output, right? And God blew that all up. And I'm really grateful that he did, as painful as it was. And what we realized kind of after a couple of months of like my husband and I really talking with our pastors, praying, really being like, okay, what is the best path for me in order to be whole in Christ, like mentally and emotionally? Because you got to understand, at that season, I wasn't dealing with like major external sins. There's no like moral failure. There's no addiction. It's just strongholds of the mind.
Yeah.
And it's lies that have gotten into my heart and in my mind that are now affecting the way that I think, the way that I see the world, the way that I react in my relationships. And so I realized it was kind of fractured. And all I knew was I want a healthy marriage. I want to be a healthy parent. And I actually want freedom in Christ. So I basically was like, what does that look like? And we kind of all came to the conclusion that probably one of the best things that I could do in that season was step down. And so I did. I stepped down from being in position at church, and I stopped traveling, and I like consciously made a decision to come off the road and come home and just be ministered to, and just actually like, what did it look like? Because to some degree, to be honest, Dana, like I had exchanged one wrong identity for another.
Yeah.
Even though I had let go of the identity of being an artist, I kind of quickly stepped into the idea, well, now I'm just a worship leader.
Yeah.
Right. And so even though that's not inherently bad, I think that there had not been a season where it was like, but wait, can we just build identity in me with no title, no talent, no external gifting attached to it? And so that's what that became. That became a season of me having to really dig deep and actually go, what does it look like to be a follower of Christ where there's no external reward for that? There's no, we put you on a platform because you're a great leader, or we send you to a conference because you are really talented, or you get to be on, like, or we give you more people to pastor because you're doing a great job of making disciples. Like, God began to really create a space where none of that could be attached to my love for him and my commitment to him. And it was in that place that I think I actually started to do the real work of allowing, work's probably the wrong word. It's the place where I became vulnerable. It's the place where I became not works-based, because there was nothing I could work for. There was no title I could work for. There was no reward I could work for. And so it really became like, oh my gosh, I just have to learn how to like be in Jesus, not do in Jesus. And that changed my whole life. And I actually experienced more freedom and more healing in that season than all the years prior to that. Not that they were bad years. It was almost like God was like, we're going to actually get to the root of who you are, and it's going to have to be in me. And it was in that season that, long story short, my couple years into it, my husband and I became part of what is the church that we're a part of now, which is called the Belonging Company. And our beautiful pastors, Henry and Alex Seeley, eventually asked me to be a part of the worship team. And at that point, I never thought I'd lead worship again. When I walked away, I genuinely was like, I probably won't ever lead worship again, but that's okay. And they eventually asked me to be a part of the worship team. Then they eventually asked me to be a part of the writing team. That's where I began to write songs, really write songs. And, eventually there was just a lot that God began to do in that season. A lot of fruit came out of that season, to be honest with you. And I think there's still fruit that's coming out of that season. And songs like Peace Be Still were written then. And it's just, God has just slowly kind of walked me back into this place that I didn't expect, honestly. Like, I wasn't trying to build a career. I mean, literally, we laughed when my record came out in January, because at the time, I think I had maybe 2,000 followers on Instagram.
That's it? No.
which people, like, if you understand music, to give you like a little bit of understanding of how the music industry works, like now, like a lot of times, like no one would even sign you if you don't have a following, right?
Yeah.
So
it's the same as like the author world. It's
yes.
like, book deals. It's sort of crazy, but
you kind of have to have built a platform now for any like a bigger entity to come alongside you. So I say that because I want people to hear that when you are doing it the way that God is calling you to do it, that it may not look like the way that everyone else does it, but it doesn't mean that God won't have his hand on it and that he won't open doors for you that no other man can open. And in the natural, it made no sense. I literally didn't have a following. I wasn't building this career in the hopes that it would turn into something, like to the point that like when we were releasing Peace Be Still, the single, my label was like, okay, so when you release it this week and you're on Instagram, make sure you like, you add your swipe up so that people can immediately like swipe up your song.
I
And
don't
I
have
had to
10,000
go,
people.
guys, I don't have a swipe up. Like,
Can you call somebody for me?
yeah, exactly. And here's the thing. For me, that was actually one of the greatest parts about all of this, because it has been for me personally, such confirmation and testament that this has been God's thing. Like in the natural, I don't have any of the things, the tangible things that you're supposed to happen or supposed to have for this to happen. But what I've had is a life of obedience. And what I've had is a life of faithfulness. And what I've had is a life of repentance when I've messed up. And I've had a life of accountability and surrender. And I just think God is like, I can do everything with that. That's all he needs. All he needs is a humble heart. When you look at David and Saul and David were equally gifted. But Saul didn't have a teachable spirit and he didn't have a repentant heart. David did. And even when David messed up really, really, really badly, God could still use him and promote him because his heart was so tender to the things of the Lord. And he was always willing to repent. He was always willing to be obedient. He was always willing to go back and get it right and do it God's way. And Saul wasn't. And I think in a lot of ways, my life looks like that. There's people that are so much more talented than me that honestly deserve to go farther and probably will go further. But man, don't shortchange what God can do with a life of obedience. That will take you so much further than your talent.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I totally relate to you because, we could cheat the process and we could speed up the process and we can buy followers but it's not real.
No.
And when even with a little drop that it's not real and you didn't do it the right way, then you carry that with you and it sets you back. So
and it's so much more fun to watch God do it in a way that you have nothing to do with. Like I literally can be like, guys, this doesn't make sense in the natural. I can't take credit for it. And it only allows me to put the spotlight back on him, which isn't that the goal? Like, isn't that the whole point of this? That like, maybe my gift gets me into certain rooms and maybe my talent gets me into certain places. But I hope that when I get into those rooms and I get into those places, I know that the present I'm meant to present is Jesus and not my gift and not my talent. That's not the thing that I should leave you with when I walk out of the room. I should leave you with the presence of God that actually can change your life. And hopefully I know that and I can recognize that. But if I'm just building on talent and building on gift then that's all I have to offer you. Yeah. And I don't think that's enough to change your life. I don't think that's enough to actually bring you the healing and the freedom and the peace and the hope that Jesus has promised us.
Hope, in your journey, like since you sort of, I'm going to say you took your foot off the gas and you stopped pushing like a, like a typical pusher.
Car, Dana. I got out of the car.
Yeah, you got out. Since you got out of the car and walked over there, how much pressure did that take off of you?
That's a good question. I think initially it didn't feel like it took pressure off. I think initially it was just hard. Yeah. Initially it just felt, I was sad. I was sad that I was walking away from something that I thought I was meant to do. And that took years to wrestle through, honestly. It wasn't like just this beautiful, no, I just feel great about it. Yeah. It probably wasn't until my mid 30s where I began to really wrestle through what does that actually mean? Like, because I think probably for the first 10 years, I was surrendered to it in more of a way that was like, okay, I did the right thing. Yeah. I did the right thing. I did the right thing. I did the right thing.
Did I do the right thing? I think I did the right thing. That's the right thing.
Then I was 35 and I started to really have to deal with this when I came off staff from church and there was no title anymore. Yeah. Of any kind. That's when I had to really go, okay, did I do this? Did I say yes? And did I walk away from this kind of in like what I was talking about in a little bit of a twisted economy of kind of like if I'm saying yes to you, then you're eventually going to say yes to me somewhere else. Like,
Yeah.
and having to kind of wrestle down, like, I think there's a little bit of an entitlement thing here. I think there's a little bit of still maybe hoping that even if it's not making a record deal or any of that kind of stuff, but that God will still like, there will be some dreams fulfilled. Right. And I really had to get to the root of that and really wrestle down, like, well, what if I never see in my lifetime some of the things that I thought I might see?
Yeah.
Will I then think that God didn't do what he said? And will I think that he wasn't faithful? And will I think that he wasn't a prom? Like, I had to really wrestle with that. And unfortunately, a lot of times I wasn't really proud of the answer that was the truth of my heart.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm grateful for that season, because I think had that season not happened and I didn't get to the root of that and I didn't get to a place where I could go, okay, God, if if I literally live the rest of my life completely unknown, completely unseen, and that when I stand before you, all that will be known is that which was done in the secret place, that which was done with nobody ever seeing it. Like, just the faithfulness of getting up every day and loving my husband and being faithful to him and raising my children and serving in the kids department or serving in, you know, the hospitality department of my church. And I never, ever, ever, ever have any ministry or a platform or notoriety of any kind. And the world will look at my life and go, what did she really do with it?
Yeah.
That I can stand before you and you'll say, good job. You cared about what I cared about. You loved me with your whole heart. You showed up and you made disciples and you told the story of how good I was.
Mm.
And all of those things, something in me shifted and I went, well, that's a successful life. That's
Yeah.
actually a life that heaven will rejoice about. That's a life that I think the angels will probably go, look what she did. Look
Yeah.
how awesome she was. She did what was the heart of the Father. Like, and I'm telling you, Dana, it changed my whole life. It
Mm.
literally, it was like the greatest Achilles heel for me. And finally, we just got to the thing, we got to the root of it and it got healed.
Yeah.
And so, to be honest, when this whole journey started again a couple years later, I fought it. I was like, "Oh, heck no. I'm not
Not
going to
again.
go. I'm not stepping into that."
No
I've
way.
literally done everything I can to not need that
Yeah.
validation, to not need to go down that path. I'm not stepping into that. That feels like a trap. That feels like a
Yep.
trick. I'm like, "Get behind me, Satan." And I mean, truthfully, like my husband, who's now my manager, they will tell you, they were like, you tried to shut this thing down and light this thing on fire 1,000 different ways. And God just kept literally putting out the fire,
Mm.
because I was so nervous that if I were to step into this in this season, that somehow I just really hadn't ever dealt with it. I really hadn't surrendered it. And I really hadn't gotten my identity rooted really and truly in Jesus. And so I was super nervous to go down this path. Like, it took me almost 2 years to really finally go, okay, I think you are asking me to do this. Like, I think I am actually supposed to make this record and sign this record deal. And that was, I know that sounds funny, but at that point in my life at 38, I had just done so much for 13 years to
Yeah.
not do that. And so my husband had really great wisdom. One night we were talking, and when I say I tried to light the thing on fire, that is not a joke. Like, I pretty much was like, I remember just like meeting with my label, who's now my label, and they're amazing. But I remember going into our initial meetings and I would say to my husband or my manager, I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to, like, I'm just going to be really honest about who I am and what I feel comfortable doing and what I don't feel comfortable doing, and, you know, all that. And I remember my manager was like, most people don't say that. He's like, but I think by you saying that, we're going to very quickly figure out either God's in this or he's not. Because if
Mm.
they make a way for you, it's not going to make sense. Like, there will be, and things like, you know, the fact that I was saying, like, I didn't have a ministry, I had no platform, all those things.
Yeah.
But my husband looked at me one night and he just said, Hope, I wonder if the same obedience and faith that it took in you to walk away from all of this is now the same faith and obedience that it's going to take for you to walk into it.
Mm.
And I had just not looked at it from that angle before. Like
Yeah, it's a
only,
shift.
yeah, it was just such a shift. And I remember just having to really wrestle down. And that was really when I felt like I started to get the picture of God going, Hope, we've done a lot of life together in the last almost 15 years. And I'm now asking you to do this. And I'm asking you to let me stretch the territory of your life, to stretch your tent pegs, to stretch your capacity, because I know that when I stretch it, the only thing you're going to tell of is my goodness. And the only thing that you're going to want to highlight is how good I am. And I want my kids to know that. I want my kids to hear that. I want my kids to see that. And that really feels like the mission. The mission doesn't even feel like songs, even though that happens to be the vehicle that I'm in and what I do. But I really feel like what I'm here to do is to tell this story, to tell the story of, hey guys, like, you don't have to do it the way you think you have to do it in order for God to actually use your life and make your life wonderful. And your life doesn't have to have a spotlight on it to be successful. That is not the definition of success.
Yeah,
that is not the definition of being obedient to Jesus either, or Jesus's reward because you were a good Christian. Like, that's not how this works. Our job is what I said earlier, to be a witness of the goodness of who Jesus is and to tell the story of his death and resurrection in whatever lane that we've been called to do, whether it's seen and highlighted or whether it's not.
Yeah. You know what I find pretty cool about what you're saying though too, is that, you live in Nashville. So you had to sort of put all this on hold while you're watching you're in the capital of music.
Dana, I had at one point in my life, I was living with several roommates that all went on to win Grammys.
Oh gosh. Wow.
Right. So like, it's not like I was just like living in this tiny little bubble. I mean, it was confronting me every single day. Like what you're alluding to.
I'm like, that must have been crazy. That must have been like, it was like a super challenge.
Yeah, because everything in you wants to pick that baton back up. Everything in you wants sometimes to go, like, I want to go down that road. Like, I think that, and yet having literally to die to your flesh, to literally go, no, God's asked me not to. And that has to be more important. Like, that actually has to be the thing that I have to care more about being in the presence of God than I do pursuing the passion of my heart. I have to choose presence or passion. And what's funny though, is the more you choose his presence, the more your passions change and the more your passions line up with the heart of the Father. And eventually you find that you didn't have to give up anything. Like, you just, it all got redirected. It all got shifted, because honestly, like, I didn't need to sign a record deal to feel like my life was fulfilled. And I still don't. Like, honestly, if next year we're all like, COVID ruined the music industry and nobody knows what to do anymore and blah, 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 and it doesn't make sense to keep making records, I'll go, okay, great. I'm still going to show up and raise my family and love my husband and make disciples and serve my church and write songs. It doesn't matter if it's not highlighted. It doesn't matter if it's not seen. I was doing that when it was unseen. I'm going to do it now when it's seen. I'll do it again when it's in, like.
Yeah, no, that it's cool. And I will say this. I appreciate the title of your album too. Peace, Be Still. Because you seem like the type of person where I'm the same way. It's hard to stay still because we're excited people and we're ready to go.
Yeah.
But it is true that you could definitely find the peace in the stillness. So I related a lot to your title, which I think is super cool too.
Alex, it almost was not the title because, the song's 4 years old. So I was like nervous to make that the title because I was like, oh, it's like old. People already know this song because it had come. Our church released it in 2017. So like a live worship version with Lauren Daigle. She sings it on our church record. So I was like nervous, like, oh, it's older, and I wanted to tie up the record something else, but my label, in their wisdom, they were like, I feel like that's a good title. That should be the title of your
It's
record.
maybe it's a reminder to you.
Oh, I mean, goodness gracious, there is not a song that I have written that has had more of it's been a direct like challenge for me. Like the song that God has been like, I'm going to use this song over and over and over in your own life to deal with your own fears, to deal with your own anxiety. It's not just a song that I wrote for other people. I had to write it for myself, my own life. And I've had to live it out and walk it
Yeah.
out, and sing those lyrics over myself when I don't feel them. You know, when it feels like, man, I don't want to sing these lyrics. I don't want to confess this. I want to just sit in my fear and in my anxiety. And I want to just, not have to like choose to move in the opposite direction. But God has just over and over and over been like, yeah, but I downloaded that song to you on purpose. That song was a gift from me to you.
Yeah, that's
Be a
cool.
weapon when you are dealing with it to sing over your own life and move yourself from the place of fear to the promise of my peace, or to the promise of my hope, or whatever that is. And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, it's awesome. So I have to ask you this last question. I
Okay.
call this show, and I love that you said you're a former athlete. What sport did you play?
I was a softball player
Okay.
for a long time.
So
Loved it.
once an athlete, always an athlete.
Always an athlete.
I say that. So your
Yes.
competitiveness, I appreciate. But
Which is
I
funny.
call this.
But you want to know what? I'm not competitive. Isn't that crazy? Like, I love sports, but I didn't care if we won or lost.
Really?
I was never, it was more just I just genuinely loved the game.
So you love the game, and maybe you liked being on the team
Yes. And I loved being on
with
a
your
team.
teammates. Yeah.
I was like, oh, if we lose, no big deal. I mean, I always gave it my best. I was like a very, very disciplined good, but my husband is actually very competitive.
Okay. I am too. So high five to him, and high five to you for not being. We could probably all learn something from that to
It's
just
annoying
enjoy.
to those people that are competitive. I know.
Yeah. But I say I call this the Becoming a Champion show. I feel like we're all on a journey
Yeah.
to
I love that.
become a champion. So
Amazing.
what does the word champion mean to you?
Ooh, champion. Oh, I think it's like, if I think about it, it makes me think of overcoming.
Mm.
Like that, whatever that thing is that is always like your Achilles heel, whatever that thing is that you just find you're like, it constantly wants to set you back or take you back or knock you down. That ability to always go like, no, I'm going to get back up and I'm going to try again. Actually, no, I know I took 10 steps forward and 2 steps back, but I'm going to take 10 steps forward again. Like, I'm going to show up again. I'm actually going to just try again. Like, and to know that maybe sometimes that, like, maybe you'll never be like, as far as a champion, like, maybe you won't ever win the award, and maybe you won't ever win the medal, but you'll have won something so much deeper, is the ability to constantly just stay on the long road. And, it's a race. I love the scripture says, like, we're in a race, and it's not a sprint. It's not a sprint. It is freaking long.
Oh yeah.
Like, it's the long race. And man, like, I don't want to be somebody that pooped out, round 20. I actually want to be like, I don't care if I come in tattered and, bleeding all over. I just want to know that I finished the race. And I think that's what part of being a champion is, that you're willing to, like, it doesn't matter how many times I fall down or I mess up. I just keep getting up. I keep doing it. I just keep doing it. I keep showing up.
Yeah, that's the spirit of a champion, right?
Yeah.
Just keep going. And it's not always going to be how you won, or it's not always going to look the way you want it to look, and it certainly won't be on your timeline, but
No.
but we will get to where it is that we want to go, if we're supposed to get there.
We will, for sure.
Cool. Hope, awesome. Thanks for hanging with me.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate your spirit, and
thanks.
I'll be rooting for you.
I appreciout that so much. It was such a treat to get to talk to you today.
Yeah, definitely. I have so much more to cover with you, but we're out of time.
I'm sorry.
but it was great, and I love it. So
I'll
see you when I see you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll see you soon. Okay.
Okay. Bye.
All right. Bye, Hope.